Hi, I'm Bill Arnold. Thank you for listening to this podcast. There are many more podcasts available at myfaithradio.com. Your support makes this possible. Thank you. And a warm welcome to the afternoon show. I'm Bill Arnold, and I bet we can all learn a lot from the life of David. He was a man after God's own heart. And we're going to talk about that in this hour, which I'm looking forward to with Dr. David T. Lamb. And David has been a regular guest on the show. I love having him on. From 2006 to 2018, he taught Old Testament at Biblical Theological Seminary. But in 2018, he started teaching at Missio Seminary because they changed the name. He's now Dean of the Faculty of the Alan A. McRae Professor of Old Testament. And he's written 6 books with a couple more on the way. I always love having David on. David, so nice to have you back.
Hey, Bill, this is great. Really looking forward to it. It's a lot of fun whenever we talk.
Yeah, and now, David, what an amazing story, amazing character, amazing man, a person that is truly inspirational because he was, God said, a man after God's own heart. So let's just start talking about David as the shepherd, because how did David's background as a shepherd prepare him to actually become king of Israel?
Yeah, I think there's a lot we could say about it. I think one of the things we need to realize that God always uses our own background in life to prepare us what he has in store for us. Literally, when the prophet Samuel came to town, poor David didn't even get to go to the feast.
All right.
He was out with the sheep.
Yeah.
Because he was like low man on the totem pole in his own family. And so but and Samuel kept thinking, well, gosh, it's got to be one of these older guys because they're big and strong and, whatever, beefy or something. But God kept saying, nope, not him, not him. And, David is just over there taking care of the sheep. But it's pretty clear that God saw something in David, as you were saying, a man after God's own heart, that there was something about taking care of sheep that was going to prepare him. And I'm not sure all of why that is, but I do think it's interesting that God often uses shepherds. A lot of the patriarchs would certainly be shepherds. And then again, God called Moses when he was taking care of the sheep for his, Zipporah's, for Jethro, his father-in-law, Zipporah's dad. And I'm not sure of all of what it is, but I do think of God uses us, and he wants us to be faithful in little things. And David was faithful as a shepherd. And there was something about being responsible for sheep, protecting them from lions and bears, which that shows up when he's talking to Saul right before he ends up killing Goliath. But there's something in that process that God was using him and shaping him. And I think for all of us, it's something we should reflect on. How has God shaped us in maybe our early years, our teen years, to bring us into the roles and responsibilities we have today? Because God's purposes go beyond just kind of, more recent events. But God was shaping me in some deep ways, even, before I might even have a clear sense of God's call on my life. And I think God was clearly doing that with David.
Mm-hmm. David, don't you love that scenario of 7 of Jesse's sons coming before Samuel, and Samuel going, nope. You got any more?
Yeah.
Well, we do have the youngest. He's out tending sheep.
I feel sorry for Samuel, though, because he's like, and again, Samuel just keeps saying, well, it's got to be this guy. It's got to be this guy. And it's like, well, do you have any other sons? And it's like, well, there's this other one, but he's taking care of the sheep. And then he shows up, and the only thing is he's got a ruddy, expression, a beautiful appearance, beautiful eyes. So I guess that qualifies. But yeah, poor Samuel. But it's a great story.
Yeah. I know you have intimated that the background as a shepherd makes him a really good candidate. But David, why do you think God ultimately selected David to become king? Because obviously there was going to be problems that God knew about. But what else do you think were the reasons God selected David?
Well, we know for Saul, at least like it seemed like the big thing was he was tall. So David didn't seem to be that tall, at least when God kind of selected him. And obviously, height is sort of a silly, although, in the world that we live in today, apparently height can make a big difference certainly in terms of first impressions. But Saul's height, it didn't work out so well for Saul. But it's interesting that the line that we hear about David, that he was a man after God's own heart, that shows up a couple of chapters before David even appears in the narrative. That shows up in chapter 1 Samuel chapter 13 verse 14. And God is speaking through Samuel to Saul to talk about, and we don't even know who it is, but it's pretty clear that it's talking that Samuel's talking about David there, and it's hard to know. He was a shepherd. Obviously, we do find him out to be a man after God's own heart. He is certainly a humble man. He was a talented man. He was a warrior. He was a musician. Just the guy had a lot of talents.
Yeah.
But ultimately, on some level, we have to just say, God chose him because God chose him.
Mm-hmm.
And God's, again, we see God's sovereignty in his selection of David. And that's kind of often how it works for us in our lives today. God will choose us to be in the roles that he puts us in today now.
Now, David, this is always something that baffles my mind a little bit, but is it safe to say that David was anointed king of Israel between the ages of, 12 or 16?
I think that's pretty likely. Again,
that's mind-blowing.
Yeah, it is.
Doesn't even have his driver's license yet. He's king of Israel. He didn't have
his driver's license. He couldn't legally drink, although back then things were a little bit different when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But no, in fact, so things were a little bit different in terms of a lot of these things. It would not have been uncommon for teens to probably go off to battle. Although it is interesting as the narrative is laid out. David's brothers make fun of him in chapter 17. And then in chapter 16 when he gets anointed. So it seems like he's going to be younger, even younger there. But it's a funny narrative, but God moves in mysterious ways, but clearly he had something special in mind for David, and David turned out, again, David was a flawed guy, and we'll may come back to that later, but God was clearly doing something special in David.
Yeah.
And it's exciting to see his story.
Dr. David T. Lamb is my guest. We're talking about David today, and I would love for you to discuss the encounter with Goliath, and I think we all talk about this story in ways that aren't as biblical as they should be. So maybe you would do us the privilege, David, of giving us the real biblical understanding of what happened between David and Goliath.
And again, it's one of the reasons I selected the Old Testament was because I felt like it was going to be a little bit easier to come up with something creative or something new. The problem with David and Goliath is it may be the most famous story in all of not just the Bible, but all of kind of literature, ancient literature.
Right.
We talk about being a David and Goliath. Whatever. It's a great story.
It's the storyline for half the movies you see today.
Yeah, it totally is the underdog that and all these things are kind of the handicaps that they have.
Sure.
And it's the classic dramatic story. Rocky, whatever. Any underdog story is this. But I don't know. I think there's a couple things that we could say. I actually read a book from Malcolm Gladwell a couple of years ago about David and Goliath, and I was really excited about that because I've read a few other things from Malcolm Gladwell. I ended up being really disappointed with this book because Malcolm Gladwell was basically saying that David was not the underdog, but the favorite, because his slingshot would have been so much more effective than the clunky Goliath, who was he was sort of believing that Goliath might have been partly blind and other things, and and again, read the book if you want, but I was disappointed. I personally, I think the text makes it very clear that David is the underdog.
Yes.
All of Israel's soldiers, all of Saul's soldiers, even David's own brothers think it's ridiculous that he would to go up against this hero, this giant of a man who, was, I don't know, who, the Muhammad Ali of his day, the heavyweight boxer, the champion of ancient Palestine.
Mm-hmm.
So he was the hero, and David was totally the underdog. But God had done something amazing in giving David these experiences of defeating a lion or a sheep. A lion or a bear while he was taking care of the sheep.
Mm-hmm.
Defeating a sheep would not be all that impressive.
No.
just to be clear.
Right. He might have lost his job as a shepherd.
Yes, exactly. You don't want to do that. You don't include that on your resume.
No.
But and then even Goliath kind of makes fun of him. One of the things I like to talk about is there's actually a lot of kind of trash talking going on. I wrote an article a few years ago about trash talking in ancient Israel. But David's own brothers kind of sort of taunt him a little bit. You've come down, you've left those few sheep of yours. This is, if you're not familiar with the stories in 1 Samuel chapter 17, but his brothers kind of taunt him. His king can't believe that he's going to do this. And then, of course, Goliath, it's like, am I a dog that you're coming at me with sticks?
Right.
And then he's like, I'm going to give your flesh to the birds of the air.
That's taunting in my book.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's
definitely taunting. But then David comes back and taunts Goliath. What does he say? I will strike you down and cut off your head. And the only reason that David could do this is because he's just got this incredible confidence in his God, who has delivered him and his sheep.
Right.
Again, it's the shepherding image, that the confidence that God gave David while he was caring for sheep and defeating these wild animals is the same confidence that David has in God when he's going up against this hero of the Philistines. But man, there was something. David's confidence was contagious. And you see that the Israelites had been cowering, but when David's little stone hit the Philistine in the head, and then David rushes forward, chops off his head, it gave incredible confidence to the whole nation of Israel, which had been cowering in fear for what I think it's 40 days. And I think this is something that leaders, that any of us need to be thinking about for, in our families, in our churches, in our ministries, that when we can be people of great confidence in God and God's ability to provide, it's contagious. And you see kind of how God just kept leading David in military situations, and this formative event kind of shaped him, and he was this hero that God used to defeat the Philistines and other of Israel's enemies.
David, you said something just now I want people to take home in their brown paper bag, and that is to have confidence in God's ability to provide. That to me is something that just kind of rocked my world just now. So thank you for that. Because that's exactly what David was doing. He was confident in God's ability to provide, and he did.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, the confidence that Goliath had initially was devastating to the Israelites. And again, this is I didn't come from a context where I did a lot of trash talking. I was on a lot of sporting opportunities, sporting events, but you see this trash talking that the Philistine engaged in. But then it is interesting that David himself kind of does some of this, and it ends up kind of moving forward. And we actually see this type of confidence displayed by other leaders. Again, Elijah does it on Mount Carmel to the prophets of Baal. He totally ridicules them. And even a lot of the prophetic literature, you see God actually taunting and the point, taunting his enemies or the enemies of Israel. And the purpose of this is to kind of inspire hope in his people.
Mm-hmm. That's so good. So interesting. Dr. David T. Lamb is my guest. We're talking about David today, and we are in 1 Samuel as well. If you have any questions or comments, you can text it over 877-933-2484. We'll be right back. You might be the kind of person that goes to Paris and still listens to Faith Radio on the app. Or you might be more like the person that goes into the next room in your apartment and listens. The good news is using the app is just as easy in both places. Downloading the free app is crazy easy. Just text the word app to 877-933-2484 and click the link. And if you happen to be in Paris, there is a really nice little coffee shop not far from the Eiffel Tower that serves a really nice chocolate biscotti. Welcome to the show. Dr. David T. Lamb is my guest. We're talking about David today. And right before the break, we were discussing the showdown between David and Goliath. And so Saul hears what David was saying and sent for him. And David told Saul, and this shows up in 1 Samuel 17, let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him. And I would imagine Saul was like, wow, who does this kid think he is? He's not a trained soldier. He's a shepherd. And yet he's going to be careful to give God the glory. And this is where I just love David.
Yeah, it is amazing. And again, it's hard to know exactly how to take Saul's actions here. Was Saul just so desperate
Maybe
that he was willing to let this young kid go? Again, Saul's a complicated character, but let's give him the benefit of the doubt here and say, well, maybe David's confidence in God was contagious even with Saul. I would sure like to hope that was the case. But I mean, it is inspiring to see that, and Saul let him go. Again, tried to throw his armor and his shield and stuff, and David's like, no, that's not going to work for me. But yeah, David's confidence affected the people, the soldiers, but it even somehow affected King Saul. And they had a complicated relationship, but yeah.
And I love when David says to Goliath, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands. Oh boy, is that confidence.
Yeah, it is truly amazing. And and again, and David knows that he might not know that this story, this incident will become one of the most famous stories in the world, in world history. But he does know that that all this assembly will know that God does not save by sword and spear. The battle is the Lord's, and will give you into our hand. So David knows that there's some kind of big battle at play. I mean, again, we see this a lot. We see this with, Moses and the Red Sea with the Egyptians. We see this with Elijah and the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. A lot of these or Gideon going up against the Midianites in Judges chapters 6, 7, and 8. That there's these times where God chooses a leader. Gideon was not as confident, right? Gideon struggled, as does Moses. Moses kind of struggles a bit too. But the good thing about Moses is Moses took his struggles directly to God. Where David here it is interesting that at this point in time, David hasn't really, we saw him get anointed in the previous chapter. There are a lot of scholars that think that his anointing might have become later, or that chapters 16 and 17 might not be in the order that they're found in our Bibles. And there's some good reasons for that. But in any case, it's hard to know what kind of relationship David had with God, but he knew that God had worked through him, protecting him from the lions and the bears that were coming to steal those sheep.
Yeah. David, I'm guessing after David killed Goliath, his sheep tending business kind of ended that day, I would imagine.
Yeah. Moving on to bigger and better things. Well, and somewhere in there, he was kind of hired to be kind of Saul's, musician, and kind of, Saul was having troubles, and we could talk about this, an evil spirit from God was tormenting him.
Yeah. Do talk about that. That's so interesting.
Yeah. And, I don't know what to say. It's hard to make sense of that. This is, again, for people that are following along, this is 1 Samuel 16, verse 14. It's like an evil spirit from Yahweh was sent to Saul. Saul had already done a couple of really bad things. He disobeyed Samuel and offered a sacrifice earlier than he should have, and again he disobeyed Samuel another time, and didn't follow Samuel's directions when it comes to wiping out the Amalekites. So Saul is not in a good place, but it's like, why would God do this? But again, even in the midst of God somehow doing this to this spirit to torment him, God is still providing for Saul through David.
Yeah.
And if Saul had been able to kind of see, oh gosh, God is providing for me through this young man who, at this point in time, as the narrative is laid out, has already been anointed, then, maybe Saul and David could have had a better relationship. Saul's going to end up being David's father-in-law.
Right.
But so it's complicated. I'm not really sure. And the text just sometimes says things without clarifying exactly why it happens. And one of the things when I tell my students is I tell them, don't make things up. If the text is not clear, you can speculate, and it's fine to speculate, but just let people know that you're speaking. Sometimes I'm speaking to pastors and preachers.
Right.
I say, don't make things up. But when you do speculate, and it's okay to do that sometimes, let people know that you're speculating,
right,
because we don't want to go beyond. We don't want to bring clarity when the text is not. And so, but and David's he's over there playing his guitar for Saul, or lyre, maybe.
Yeah.
But most of us don't play lyres anymore, so I say it's like a guitar, and and it somehow brought peace to Saul, although a little bit later on Saul's going to start chucking spears at him. So,
I know.
You think if you're a worship leader, you think it's bad when you get sort of the nasty email on Monday,
right,
hey, why'd you sing this song? Well, but just be glad that they're not throwing spears at you.
Amen. Yeah. So let's talk about Saul's son Jonathan and the friendship that David and Jonathan had. It teaches something to us about friendships today.
Yeah, it is pretty amazing.
It is.
Yeah, and from a strategic perspective, Jonathan and David were rivals, because David's trajectory is up. It's hard to know when everybody knew that David was anointed to be king, but in the pretty early stages of, in chapters 18, 19, and 20 of First Samuel, um, the women of Israel started singing this song. Saul's killed his thousands. And okay, so Saul's listening to this. And it's like, what? They're singing about me. Saul's killed his thousands. And then it keeps going. And David, his tens of thousands. Mm-hmm. It's like Saul's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
And so that's going on, but it's pretty clear that, David is going to be the next king. But again, back then, the way things worked was the son of the current king becomes king when the current king dies. And so the oldest son would in this case, be Jonathan. But somehow Jonathan has just this profound affection for this person that should be his rival. And again, it's kind of mind-boggling, but it tells us something. Again, as bad as Saul, Saul starts out pretty good, and he's kind of a warrior, and he does some good things early on, but then he kind of falls apart not too long into his reign, and then obviously what he does in pursuit of David is just really evil. But he has this son that is so loyal to David, despite the fact that David really, he should want David dead, because even more than a rival to just Saul, David is a rival to Jonathan. But it is just truly amazing, and how Jonathan basically risks his life on behalf of David. And Jonathan's he's a war hero as well. He does a lot of kind of really noble things in battle. But God works through this friendship.
Yeah, Jonathan knew and accepted God's plan, and then he went ahead and protected David from his own murderous father. This is the friend I want to have.
Yeah, no, and that's really impressive. Oh, and then not only Jonathan, but also Jonathan's sister Michal, who was David's first wife, as the text is laid out. She kind of risks his life. It does the thing where they stuff the bed full of like extra blankets to make it look, and they've got whatever, a straw hair coming out. We've seen this in movies all the time, mm-hmm. Right? Well, that's kind of what they did. And then Saul, and then David escaped. So so both Saul and Michal are really going against the interests of their father to protect this man that, again, according to the text, both of them love David. Mm-hmm. And the nation love David. David, my name, I'm David, right? So I know this, but the primary meaning of the word David apparently is beloved, and that was certainly true for David in the Bible. He was loved by everybody.
David, we're going to take a break, but when I come back, I want to find out what life was like for David when he was on the run, because this is an interesting time in his life, and I want to have some time on that topic. David T. Lamb is my guest. We're going to continue our discussion after a short break. So if you want to know more about what it means to even begin a brand new relationship with Jesus, or to chat with someone who can help, you can text the word faith right now to 41224. I hope you do. We'll be right back.
It's the afternoon show with Bill Arnold. Prime time, drive time. Let's get it started. Jump in your car. Yeah. What's for dinner? Hey. It's the afternoon show with Bill Arnold.
Welcome to the show. Dr. David T. Lamb is my guest. He is a professor at Missio Seminary and dean of the faculty, and the Alan A. McRae Professor of Old Testament. David, does that mean you have a corner office with a medium-sized window?
I used to have a corner off with a medium-sized window, but then we relocated from the Philadelphia suburbs into the city, and my office is windowless. So my wife gave me a poster of a window that looked out onto this beautiful mountain landscape. So yes, because
Yeah.
when you're we do have nice view of the of kind of downtown Philadelphia, and then William Penn on City Hall.
Nice.
But I just don't have that view out my window.
Well, that's a bummer. Well, anyway, right before the break, I asked you about what life was like for David when he was on the run from Saul.
Yeah. So again, God often allows all of us to encounter difficulties. And that's certainly true for people in the Bible. I mean, you don't have to read very long, and particularly in the Old Testament narratives, before you start encountering, you know, like all these difficult things that Abraham and Jacob and Moses, and certainly David encountered, and it's hard to know all of why God does that.
Mm-hmm.
But when David had, he was probably a teenager. We talked about this earlier when he was anointed by Samuel, and he doesn't become king till he's age 30. And so for maybe, it's probably about 15 years. And most of that time he was on the run. And if you can imagine, the most powerful person in his country, Saul, wanted to kill him. Again,
Right.
David's over there in the corner playing his guitar, and Saul keeps chucking spears at him. It's like, wow,
That's a stressful job.
that would be a stressful job. Yeah, I occasionally students complain about grades I give them. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
it's minor. So, but during this time, God was really deeply shaping David, God was shaping him in his years of being a shepherd, but God was shaping him in a new way and allowing these difficulties to come his way. And again, I just think, it's possible that David wrote a bunch of his Psalms during this period of time. In any case, he was clearly a man after God's own heart, and kind of pouring out his heart to God. And I just think that when we encounter difficulties today, we need to have the same mindset. We can pour out our heart to God. God welcomes our honest prayers, even our laments. David certainly prayed a lot of his Psalms kind of have a tone of lament. But I just think God allows us to be in a place of dependence. And while David was fleeing Saul, he was in a highly dependent place. Now, he did kind of have his band of merry men. It is a little bit like, Robin Hood, the mythology. We've seen a bunch of these Robin Hood movies. Again, I prefer the Disney one, right? They're all animals, but that at least the way the myth of Robin Hood goes is he's kind of being oppressed by the power of the sheriff of Nottingham, and all. But he is still doing good things for the people around him. What was the Harrison Ford movie? The Fugitive. There we go.
Yeah.
The Fugitive. I love that movie.
Me too.
Where Harrison Ford has been falsely accused of this crime. And again, I'll try to avoid spoilers here, although for movies that are like, whatever, it's got to be 25, maybe 30 years old, I feel a little less reluctant to give spoilers. But the Harrison Ford's character is being pursued, and yet he keeps risking his life or risking being arrested in order to help people. And that's what David does, which is just an amazing story. One of my favorite stories in this period of this part of 1 Samuel chapter 23 of 1 Samuel, where David saves the city of Keilah. again, probably a lesser, I mean, not nearly as familiar to people as the Goliath story, but David finds out that this city, which is kind of on the border between Israel and the Philistine territory, the Philistines are attacking the city of Keilah. And so David prays, hey, God, should I go attack these Philistines? And God says, yes. And so he does it. Again, this is the thing that Saul should have been doing. But Saul was too distracted by chasing after David because he was jealous to do this. And then David's men like, hey, Dave. I don't know if they called him Dave or not, but hey, Dave. I don't think this is a good idea, and they're like, well, so David decides to double check with God, and God says, yes, go attack these Philistines. I'm going to give them into your hand. And so he does it. And now at this point in time, you would think the city would be pretty grateful. But as it turns out, Saul finds out that he's there. And he decides, wait a minute, is the city of Keilah that I have just delivered, are they going to hand me over to King Saul? And God says, yeah, they will do that.
Wow.
And can you imagine how heartbreaking that would devastate?
Yes.
Here's this city that David has just risked his life for, who are going to basically betray him and kind of lead him back, to be threatened, to be killed by Saul. And then pretty much the next story, David has an opportunity to kill Saul. And and again, this is straight out of a classic drama. David is on the run from Saul, and Saul is going to kind of relieve himself in a cave, and David is hiding in the cave.
He could put an end to it.
He could, the whole thing is here right now, and it's like, well, why does David just not kill him when he has the chance? Because David certainly could have. God had already anointed him to be king. David's killed his tens of thousands. Okay, so it's not going to be a big deal if it's going to go up to 10,001.
Right.
But and the cynical side of me kind of thinks, well, maybe David didn't want to set a precedent for regicide. Okay, because the reality back then is king that came to the throne after being killed by the person that succeeded them can often get killed as well. But I don't know. David apparently loved this man, Saul, that was trying to kill him. And he did not want to bring his hand up against the Lord's anointed. And again, it's just, for me, it's just mind-boggling how it's totally a loving your enemy thing. I mean,
it is.
Sometimes people seem to think that the whole loving the enemy thing, Jesus came up with for the first time in the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus certainly kind of reformulated it in a new way, but we see, despite what some people think about the God of the Old Testament or people in the Old Testament, that we have a lot of examples of people loving their enemies, and we see that here with David and Saul. And again, it's just very clear to me that this is yet another manifestation that David is a man after God's own heart.
Mm-hmm. Now, David, when we look at David's sin against Bathsheba and his sin against Uriah, and we talk about him being a man after God's own heart, how does he commit these horrible sins and yet still be a man after God's own heart? Is it because of his laments and his repentance?
Yeah, that's a hard one.
I know. That's why I asked.
Yeah, thank you. He does repent at the end. But I mean, we're all flawed people. And I think, it says, talks about Noah being righteous, walking with God. We kind of see similar language when the text talks about Job was righteous. So that similar, the language that's used to describe David is a little bit different, but I do think there's something that happens in David's life after he becomes king that forces him to become less dependent upon God. David was pretty clearly kind of he was doing well when he was fleeing before he was king. Because he was totally dependent upon God. We see him seeking God out with the city of Keilah. We see him, actually really reasoning with Saul. Like, why are you trying to pursue me? And then he does it again. So this is 1 Samuel 24 and then 1 Samuel 26. And then the second time, Saul stops. But then when we get into to 2 Samuel, we see that this just horrific sin. And I don't know. It's pretty clear that even a man after God's own heart can really fall hard due to the temptations of sin. And what Paul himself, the Apostle Paul, would talk about himself as a chief of sinners. On all have sinned. And David certainly gives him a run for his money with Bathsheba and Uriah.
All right, David, let me take a little break. When we come back, I want to jump ahead into 1 Samuel chapter 25 and learn about David and Nabal and Abigail. If you don't mind, Dr. David T. Lamb is my guest. We're talking about the life of David today. We'll be right back. We carry each other's burdens. Please know you can bring us your prayer concerns and we will pray. Share your prayer requests with the Faith Radio team by texting or calling 877-933-2484, or share your prayer requests with the Faith Radio staff and listeners at myfaithradio.com. Oh, the life of David, what a fascinating story. We're talking today to Dr. David T. Lamb, and we are learning a lot about David. And if you know anything about chapter 25, with David and Nabal and Abigail. If you don't know anything about it, you're going to learn something right now.
Okay. So this is actually one of my favorite stories. Again, with the life of David, there's almost too much to pick from. But so David's on the run, and as we said just a couple minutes ago, again, a little bit like Robin Hood and his band of merry men, David is just kind of going around and doing good for people, even though his life is in danger from the king. And one of the things that David was doing is he ended up kind of almost basically protecting the sheep and the flocks of this guy named Nabal. Now, it's interesting. Nabal's got a great name because his name basically means fool. So for any of you parents out there, just don't name your kid Nabal. That's literally naming your kid foolish. Right. And it's possible that was a nickname, but there was a feast coming, and David thought, well, we're kind of scrounging together. I've got this band of merry men, and we need a place to celebrate this feast. And, here we are, been taking care of Nabal and protecting him. Again, it's literally David is kind of almost shepherding for Nabal, keeping his animals safe. No one's stealing them. No wild animals are taking them and consuming them. So David kind of says, hey, go to ask this Nabal, like, hey, can we celebrate this feast with you? And Nabal, being a fool, just kind of says, who's David? Who is the son of Jesse? And he totally insults them. Mm-hmm. Now, David, unlike the restraint that David showed with Saul, David wants to show no restraint. So the messenger comes back and tells this to David. Now, again, David's killed his tens of thousands. And so David is now on the war path, and he is going to it's going to be ugly. He is on his way. But Abigail, the wife of Nabal, now it turns out, we find out that she was clever and beautiful. Okay, so pretty impressive woman. But she realizes David is a man of war. He's gonna come and he's gonna slaughter us all. So she was clever and beautiful, and she was an amazing, well, I guess we'd say hostess or feast provider. She pulls together all these resources and then comes out and kind of stops David on the war path. And then the thing that's amazing to me is Abigail's her incredible humility. She falls on her face. Again, this is all in 1 Samuel 25. Falls on her face, says, "Upon me be the guilt. My Lord, don't take this guy seriously, for as his name is, so is he." So she's like, yeah, he can, she kind of throws him under the bus.
Yeah.
But he certainly deserves it. But then she says, I know that God has called you. I know that God is going to give you a sure house, a dynasty. You're going to be the king. So basically stop this bloodshed. And then the thing is, David listens to her. I love this. In fact, David starts to sing her praises. Whenever I teach this story, I address the men in my class and I say, hey, men, wise men listen to wise women. David was a wise man because he listened to this wise woman, Abigail. And David just says, God has sent you, Abigail now, God has sent you to me to prevent me from blood guilt. And David is able to see in the same way that God provided for him with that slingshot against those bears and those lions when he was a shepherd, and in the same way God provided for him with that slingshot when he was fighting Goliath, this monster, this hero from the Philistines. God provided this woman to give him, and again, maybe David there's a little bit of, he was a little hangry, right? He was hungry and he was angry and there was a lot going on. And, Abigail comes and feeds him. I mean, Obviously some people would say the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. Well, somehow that kind of worked with Abigail, but, and then you know what happens? God just kills Nabal. David doesn't do it. God does it himself. And again, God is a just judge, and it's maybe a little bit troubling. And then guess what David does to Abigail? He marries her. And I don't know all of why, but it's pretty clear David married her, and that's the rest of the story. They lived happily ever after. But so I just love how David was soft enough to listen to this woman that God had clearly sent, and that's how David had perceived it, that she was sent by God to him to prevent him from committing this act of bloodshed.
Mm-hmm. David, just talking about David is a conversation I could have once a week. It's so interesting, it's so rich, and there's so much there.
Yeah, no, it's, again, he's the man I'm named after. And I realize that there's a lot of amazing things we could say about David. And obviously we need to ultimately think about how David's narrative points us to Jesus, because, how did they talk about Jesus? Well, he was a son of David. And I mean, obviously, and, we find out more about David as you keep going into 2 Samuel, and David had a lot of problems.
Yeah.
But there was something in the fact that he was a man after God's heart. God worked through him, and then God established a dynasty, a royal dynasty that ultimately leads us to Jesus. And that's kind of how the New Testament begins in Matthew chapter 1. And this title that people have for Jesus, often, Son of David, have mercy.
Mm-hmm.
But he is amazing man, complicated, wonderful, popular, troubling, and tragic.
So good.
And maybe we'll get a chance to talk about some of his family issues that
That'd be
show
great.
up more in
David, thank you so much for being on the program today. It's been a delight having you on. Yeah.
My pleasure.
Dr. David T. Lamb has been my guest. We're going to take a break, and then Dr. Randy Nelson is going to join. We'll be right back. Thanks for listening. Programming like this is made available through your support. Information available at myfaithradio.com.
On the latest episode of the Wow God Stories podcast, we go to Africa.
I was raised in Sierra Leone in a community that truly lived the phrase, "It takes a village."
Until one day, the world outside Anita's village broke in.
I didn't grow up in a war zone, but I watched one unfold in the country I love.
God brought hope to her story and many others through radical provision.
God began to direct us towards Uganda, Africa.
I was born and grew up in the countryside of Ethiopia.
Nanjan I met in Kigali, Rwanda.
Discover how God showed up in the middle of war, loss, and impossible odds in Africa. Stories that'll make you say,
"Wow, God.
Wow, God.
Wow, God."
Wow God Stories, wherever you get your podcasts.